I want to reflect on Source Foundation color system, and this is Color System Deep Dive. There is an article on Medium where I share my thoughts on multi-brand color systems and how I made one. You may check the description for a link. In this video, I would like to expand on dynamic colors and shed some light on what makes Source color system is so beautiful. And for me, it's an ability to paint your UI pretty much anything. And, which very important, the dark mode is in the system's DNA. You can make it however tint you like. You can choose whatever brand color you need. And it's built with accessibility in mind, which means that by default the system is producing accessible and beautiful color schemes. Now let's see how it works. The first thing first, let's dive deeper into the color system architecture. We have our global colors. These are basic color swatches, raw color values that set the tone for pretty much everything, neutrals, accents, and so on. On top of that, we have system colors. System colors consume global colors, and they are the core to decorate everything in your design. And these colors enable the dark mode. On top of that, there are component colors. I'm talking about very specific elements with very specific visual properties, and all of these visual properties are derived from the system colors. Let's have a closer look at the global colors because I feel like this is what makes the Source Foundation is so special. Global colors made of two distinct pieces. The first bit is our neutrals, and neutrals are driven with just two parameters. There is a hue and a saturation. Changing the hue value would change the tint of your neutrals, and the saturation would decide how much of it you want. By default, the saturation is set to 20%, but you can make it super neutral with zero saturation. For the light theme, I use the top part of the pre-generated palette, and for the dark theme, I use the bottom part. So I split it in half. I take the first half, and the first half perfectly suits the light theme, and the second half perfectly suits the dark theme. And then I just assign them to my system colors, like that. There is a very important step, which is a color transformation. I wanted to have an ability to transform these colors. For example, I think that it is essential to be able to change their opacity value via RGBA function. To make it work, I introduced a pre-processing step where global colors are assigned to my system palette as raw values, hence why globals are never exposed directly. But they fed into the system color values with an ability to transform these values however I like. Then we have the accents, which is a pre-generated palette. Each color is made with the three parameters. A hue value. For example, the blue is 210 degrees by default. Then we have the saturation. This one sets the same value across the board. And then we have the luminance, which would define the extremes, and the base color. Basically, all of these sliders would set how bright is going to be the brightest color, how dark is going to be the darkest color, and what would be the shade for the base color, which goes right in the middle. For the system colors, I use none of them but the most vibrant ones. And this is how they are assigned. There are two very light shades where I use RGBA function to make them semi-transparent, and I feel like with some opacity they blend with underlying background color in a much nicer way. The next feature to check is dynamic saturation. I made it in a very straightforward way first. It was a ramp where each color is 1% darker than the previous one. So it worked fine with the grayscale colors, but after I added some tint, I discovered that the mid part is oversaturated. Not very happy with the result, I started to search for something more natural that would look like this. To make it happen, I use the magic of math to make the saturation a function of lightness. So at the 0% and at the 100% lightness, on both sides literally, the saturation adjustment have no effect on the color. But as we move closer to the 50%, the saturation adjustment makes saturation drop by 36%. I found that this way the midsection to become more balanced. So you can see the results side by side. Next go, the another concept I would like to expand on. I call it a distance. In a nutshell, it defines the strategy on how to assign global colors to the final palette. But let's see some examples first. This is the default pattern, 2%. It's very clean and very light. When I make it 4%, grays become more contrasting. Check the sidebar and the main body here. At 3%, it is something in the middle. And let's check the dark mode. It is another great illustration of the concept. So now the 3% distance and the 4. And this is how it works. So I got 100 shades from white, which is 100% lightness, to the black, which is 0. Let's imagine for a second that our distance is 0%, which means that every shade in a series would be exactly the white because there is no distance in between them. But as I increase the distance, it's 2% by default. And it means that every next shade in a series will be 2% darker than the previous one. And this way we can make our design to look a bit more contrasting with a 3 or 4% value. And the same applies for the dark mode. As the distance goes down, you can see that the colors become much and much closer. So the last bit to cover is our accents. There is a CodePen playground which does exactly what I'm about to explain. So to build the accent color ramp, we need to set our base color first. And it's hue, the saturation, and the lightness. By default, I always made a 50% lightness. And for different colors, it would outcome the different contrast ratios because perceived brightness of the color is closely connected to the hue. So the blue at 50% lightness would give us less than 4:1 contrast ratio. And I found out that if I change the color luminance, it would affect the contrast ratio in a very predictable way. So at 18%, all the accent colors would give you 4.5:1 contrast ratio against the white. And it works for all the colors, regardless of their nature. Okay, now let's do the rest of the shades. So I add 2 more by setting up the maximum and the minimum luminance for my base color. This way I have 3 key shades in my ramp. The next thing what I do, I would extend it to a certain number, which is 7, and I fill the gaps programmatically. The cool thing about this function, the luminance function, is that it produces a very predictable result regardless of the color. This way I get the range of colors with a very predictable contrast ratio, which now enables me to use these colors for a very specific purpose. And finally, I assign global color values to my actual token values. These are my system colors. It follows the same pre-processing as neutrals, so there is an ability to transform color values as I like. And this is the result you get by default. Very beautiful colors and clear guidelines on how to use them. So, and at the end, I would like to say a word about the color guide available in every playground file. Go check them out. It greatly expands on the primary palette, the system colors, and happy designing.